Sign the transfer, Evelyn. 10% for life. Be reasonable. My father's voice didn't shake. It never does when he's taking something from me. My mother sat across the table, pearls twisted between her fingers. Trent leaned back, smirking like this was already over. I looked down at the papers, my name printed, my worth priced, and I said no. Glass shattered. Silence followed. That's the night everything ended, and the night my story truly began. My name is Evelyn Whitlow, 30 years old, a piano teacher who lived on secondhand groceries, and the granddaughter of billionaire Harrison Whitlow, the only person who ever believed in me. He once told me, money can buy a piano, but it can't buy music. Now he was gone, and all that was left was a key, a storm, and a war over his name. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a signature. The church smelled of lilies and rain. 7 black umbrellas dotted the steps of First Presbyterian, each one carrying a Whitlow name, except mine. My parents stood near the altar, shaking hands, their grief rehearsed, their tears dry. Trent leaned against a pillar, scrolling through his phone, bored even at our grandfather's funeral, and I stood at the very back, close enough to hear the whispers but far enough to be forgotten. The music teacher, someone murmured. The disappointment. When the casket closed, it felt like the last door that had ever been opened to me. He'd been the only one who saw value in what couldn't be sold. Integrity, art, peace. I remembered our last afternoon together. He was already frail, the light in his study golden and soft. He'd listened while I played the unfinished prelude I'd been composing for him. When I stopped halfway through, he smiled. "Don't rush the ending, Evelyn," he said. Then he pressed something small and heavy into my hand. A brass key engraved with his initials, HW, for when you have nowhere else to go. At the time, I thought he was being sentimental. Now, as the coffin lowered into the earth and my parents discussed inheritance with his banker, I realized he'd been warning me. When I turned to leave, a woman I didn't know, tall, poised in a gray suit, met my eyes and nodded once, like we shared a secret. Later, I'd learn her name, Lucia Ramos, the first of my grandfather's allies, and the first person to tell me, "Your grandfather planned for everything, Evelyn, even this." Monday arrived heavy with rain. Montfort Avenue glistened under clouds the color of ash. The lawyer's office smelled of leather, ink, and grief. My parents came first, polished, silent, ready to collect. Trent strolled in last, late as always, sunglasses still on indoors. Mason Everett, my grandfather's lawyer, stood at the head of the table. His voice carried a calm that felt older than the storm. "Harrison Whitlow was of sound mind," he began. The room waited, breathing greed. My name fell from his lips like a spark in dry grass. "I leave the entirety of my estate to my granddaughter, Evelyn Whitlow." The air broke. My father's chair screeched backward. My mother gasped like she'd swallowed glass. Trent muttered, "You can't be serious." Mason didn't flinch. He reached for the remote and dimmed the lights. A projector flickered. My grandfather appeared, sharp eyes, gentle voice. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone," he said. "I've given much to those who took much. Now I leave everything to the one who gave without asking." He paused, almost smiling. "Evelyn, you visited when no one else did. You played for me when silence was all I had. Carry this legacy with dignity, not fear." The room went still. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. When the lights returned, Mason placed an envelope on the table. Red wax sealed with my initials, EW. He read aloud the clause my grandfather had built. "If Evelyn signs under pressure or transfers ownership, the assets will automatically dissolve into the Harrison Whitlow Foundation." My father laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. "He planned to strip his own family," he spat. Mason corrected him softly. "He planned to protect what you never valued." The argument exploded. Accusations, insults, slammed fists. My mother hissed, "Ungrateful girl." Trent demanded a startup fund for fairness. No one mentioned love. Only numbers. When silence returned, Mason looked at me. "There's more, Evelyn. A second envelope. For you alone." He slid it across the table. "Open it when the house stops feeling like home." That night, my father called another meeting. A trap disguised as dinner. He laid out new papers. "Sign this, take 10% and stay family," he said. I met his stare. "No," I whispered. He rose slowly. "Then leave, tonight." So I did. With one duffel, a photograph, and a key. The brass one engraved with HW. Rain followed me down the mountain road. Each drop sounded like an ending, or maybe a beginning. He planned for their greed. I would learn to honor his faith. Rain chased me down the mountain road, headlights slicing through the dark. The brass key in my palm felt heavier than gold. I whispered his name once. Grandpa, please let this mean something. At the end of the winding drive, the gates of Seven Oaks loomed. The mansion looked like a memory carved from stone. Its windows glowed faintly, as if waiting for me. When I turned the key, the lock clicked like a heartbeat. Inside, everything smelled of cedar and lemon polish. The chandelier shimmered in silence. And standing in the doorway was Grant Holloway, my grandfather's oldest aide. He bowed slightly, eyes soft. Miss Evelyn, he said you'd come tonight. His words steadied me more than I expected. He led me through halls lined with portraits. Whitlows in oil and arrogance. At the corridor's end stood a steel-reinforced door. Grant pressed a code and the hum of machinery filled the space. Rows of monitors flickered to life. Every hallway, every gate, every inch of Seven Oaks under watch. He installed this last year, Grant said quietly. He said it would be family we'd need to guard against. The words hit like thunder. To need cameras against your own blood. That was the true inheritance. We sat in the study, the fire casting amber light across his old chessboard. I opened the second envelope Mason had given me. Inside, a handwritten note. If you're reading this from a place that no longer feels like home, trust the key. Grant knows what to do. And remember, you will not be alone. I read it twice, the ink smudged where tears fell. Even in death, he was still orchestrating everything. Near midnight, headlights swept the driveway. Grant checked the cameras. One vehicle, familiar plates. My pulse stuttered. He opened the door. Standing in the rain was Mason Everett, soaked to the bone, holding a folder. He set it on the desk between us. Your grandfather called this the safeguard file, he said. It outlines a reserve fund. 2 years of protection. Legal and personal. 2 years. He had built me a breathing space inside a war I didn't yet understand. Then Grant spoke again, his voice low. There's something else you should see. He played back footage from the night after the funeral. Trent sneaking into the mansion, rifling drawers. I felt my stomach twist. Why would he? Grant's tone hardened. That's not the part that worries me. He pointed at another frame. A blurred figure, different shape, moving deeper into the house. Someone I trusted. The screen went black. Grant's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Your grandfather saw everything coming, Miss Evelyn. But even he didn't know who the traitor would be. I stared at the frozen monitor, my reflections staring back. For the first time since his death, I wasn't sure who was on my side. The war for the Whitlow legacy had just begun. Morning came gray and restless. The storm had passed, but the air felt charged, as if the clouds hadn't decided whether to leave. I hadn't slept. Every creak of Seven Oaks sounded like a question. I didn't want answered. Grant found me in the study, still dressed from the night before. Someone's here, he said. You should see this. On the monitors, sleek black cars lined the front gate. Men in suits stepped out, briefcases in hand. And at the center, my father, my mother, and Trent. Their faces were carved in fury and purpose. They entered like a boardroom invasion. My father's voice cracked through the marble hall. Evelyn Whitlow is unfit to manage the estate. We have evidence of forgery and fraud. I stood at the base of the staircase, every step behind me echoing the ghosts of my childhood. Evidence? I asked. Trent threw a folder onto the table, papers spilling like confetti. A contract, my supposed signature at the bottom, transferring everything back to him. It looked real, down to the tilt of each letter. My hand trembled, but my voice didn't. That's not mine. Mason stepped from the shadows beside me, calm as steel. The document is forged. Mr. Whitlow anticipated coercion attempts. That's why the codicil clause exists. Any signed transfer dissolves the entire estate into the Harrison Whitlow Foundation. The color drained from my father's face. You'd burn $7 billion just to spite your family? I met his stare. No, father. I'd protect what he built from people who never understood it. The room fractured, voices clashing, rage echoing off the walls. My mother's pearls rattled against her throat as she shouted, "You betrayed us for pity money." Pity? I laughed once. He gave you everything. Houses, stocks, your name, and you turned it into debt. He gave me nothing but faith, and I turned it into purpose. Trent lunged forward, fists clenched. This isn't over. I'll take it all back. Grant stepped between us, eyes blazing. Enough, you're trespassing on private property. Before anyone could respond, the double doors opened again. A woman's heels clicked across the marble. Judge Eleanor Price, flanked by 2 officers. Her voice cut clean through the chaos. This meeting is over. Evidence of forgery and unlawful entry is already on record. Leave now or be escorted out. My father's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he looked small. They gathered their papers, faces burning with humiliation. At the doorway, he turned to me. "This isn't the end, Evelyn. You'll regret making enemies of your own blood." I met his gaze, steady and cold. "I didn't make enemies. You did." The doors slammed behind them, the echo rolling through Seven Oaks like thunder. I stood in the silence they left behind, hands trembling, breath steady. For the first time, I understood what legacy meant. It wasn't money. It was endurance. And I had just proved I could carry it. The courtroom felt colder once they were gone. Their voices lingered like ghosts in marble. Judge Price's ruling echoed through me. The Whitlow estate was mine, legally, irrevocably. But more than that, so was my peace. Weeks passed. Seven Oaks began to breathe again. Laughter replaced shouting. Music replaced silence. I reopened the music room. Sunlight poured through tall windows, soft and golden. Dust danced like notes in the air. Grant stood by the door, smiling faintly. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. For once, I believed him. We launched the Harrison Whitlow Foundation soon after. $2 billion dedicated to scholarships and community rebuilding. It wasn't charity. It was legacy, turned outward. At the opening gala, I stood behind the podium. Cameras flashed, but I didn't flinch. "Money can build walls," I said. "But legacy should build bridges." Applause rolled through the hall, warm and steady. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I felt surrounded, by choice, not obligation. Sunday morning found me at Riverside Cemetery, a single white lily in my hand. The wind from the Blue Ridge carried his scent of cedar and rain. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "I protected what you built, and I found myself in it." The trees rustled like applause. Somewhere in that quiet, I swear I heard him laugh. Later, back at Seven Oaks, I sat at the grand piano. My fingers found the melody I'd never finished. It wasn't perfect. It was real, and that was enough. If you've ever been betrayed by family, remember this: you can build a new one from the truth. You can start again, and you can still make music out of pain. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. If you've been through this, you're not alone.
I was sipping lukewarm coffee when the Post appeared tucked between a weather alert and an ad for linen jumpsuits I'd never searched for. My niece had uploaded a looping boomerang champagne flutes clinking ocean shimmering behind them. The caption read, "Ward Family Yacht Retreat Loading." Tradition continues. I paused thumb mid-scroll, the annual trip. The one I'd been invited to twice in 13 years of marriage. Once the year Jonas and I eloped and Portia was trying to be inclusive. The second 3 years ago when I suggested rotating the itinerary and was never asked again. I clicked the Post open. The tags were there. Portia the twins, Aunt Evelyn with her oversized sun hat, and even that woman Tina, the Pilates instructor who once mistook me for Jonas's assistant at a holiday brunch. But not me. No text, no invite, no oversight. I didn't feel rage, just stillness. That kind of hollowness you get when something isn't surprising but still stings. I checked the family group chat, Ward Legacy Voyagers. Jonas had added me long ago. I searched for it anyway. Nothing. Either I'd been removed or it had quietly shifted to a new thread where my name never belonged. I put my mug down the crack near the handle, catching against my finger. I hadn't noticed it growing. That evening, Jonas breezed in, loosening his tie and kissing my cheek. His day had been fine. Mine had been invisible. "Did you see your sisters planning the yacht trip again?" I asked lightly. He frowned at his phone, then glanced up. "Yeah? I think Mom mentioned it. It's still early. I'm sure they'll add you." I nodded, like that meant something. After dinner, while he tuned out to stock alerts and half-watched baseball, I opened a blank note on my phone and titled it, "Things They Didn't Think I'd Notice." The first line I typed was, "Ward Family Yacht Retreat." No invite again. Then I closed the note, finished the dishes, and filed the feeling away, not as evidence, yet just memory. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing across the counter. A message preview blinked through the screen. Portia. The words underneath made my jaw lock. The message preview read, "Final cabin list confirmed." Excited, I tapped it open, expecting another group update I wasn't technically part of. But instead, what I saw was a screenshot clearly meant for someone else. A table of cabin assignments from the charter company. Neat columns, assigned bunks. My name crossed out with a red digital pen. Next to it, reassigned to Tina L. Tina. the woman who once asked if I managed Jonas's schedule. Beneath the image came a follow-up message. Oops, wrong. Text. LOL. Just realized we might have missed reserving your spot. Total mix-up trip filled up faster than expected this year, but we'll catch up after, yeah. The emojis were like acid. I didn't respond. I knew I couldn't trust my fingers to stay polite. Later that afternoon, I showed Jonas the message. He read it once, then handed the phone back too quickly. She probably just got overwhelmed. Don't take it personally, he said, eyes sliding away like they always did when discomfort settled between us. I didn't answer him. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the email receipts from last year's charter. A few keystrokes later, I found the name of the company, the email trail, and a copy of the joint ownership agreement I had signed, though only one of our names ever came up in conversation. I printed everything. One by one, each document came out clean and sharp. I slid them into a manila folder, the same kind I used for tax prep. On the tab, I wrote in careful pen truth. I didn't write to Portia. Didn't send a message to the family chat. I just filed the screenshots and the receipts, then placed the folder in my bottom drawer next to appliance warranties and birth certificates. When Jonas walked past the open office door later that evening, he paused for a second like he might say something. He didn't. I didn't need him to. I already knew what came next. I used to think it was better to let things go. The wrong name on a place card, the family email chain that somehow skipped me, the Christmas itinerary with the time wrong until I showed up late and got blamed for missing the group photo. Portia once tagged the wrong Selena on Facebook, a woman in Florida with 3 kids and a pet lizard. I messaged her. She never fixed it. The photo stayed up for weeks. Then there was the baby shower for Rachel Jonas's cousin. I found out the day before. Portia said, "Oh, I thought you were out of town." I wasn't. I'd even sent a gift. Each time I swallowed it down, told myself, they don't mean it. Don't make it worse. But silence has a price. You don't realize how expensive it is until your name is quietly erased and no one thinks to ask where you went. Jonas stood by the doorway last night watching me add another printout to the folder. He didn't ask what I was doing. I didn't offer it. This morning, I opened the hallway cabinet and pulled out the original yacht paperwork. I hadn't looked at it in years. Not since we bought it. It was my idea. My investment. I'd even handled the down payment solo. But the accountant said it'll be easier if both names are listed for tax and trust purposes. So I added Jonas. Simple. Clean. No fanfare. Funny how paperwork can become prophecy. I ran my finger down the ownership clause, equal co-owners. No distinction. No matter what Portia's dinner toasts implied. I slipped the documents into the folder and zipped it shut. I wasn't packing anger. I was packing proof. Not for a confrontation. For my return. And this time I wouldn't knock. The wheels of my suitcase clicked over the wooden dock, steady and deliberate. I wasn't early, but I wasn't late either. Just on time, though, not by their invitation. Ahead, the yacht curved sleek and silver against the sky, all polished rails and curated elegance. Portia stood near the boarding gate, her laugh mid-flight champagne flute tilted delicately in her hand. She didn't see me right away. But when she did, her face locked in place. Not shocked, just stalled. A beat too long a twitch behind her smile that never reached her eyes. Jonas was nearby, not beside her, but close enough to pretend neutrality. He didn't wave. He didn't move. The group turned gradually, like choreography rehearsed in whispers. Their bodies angled subtly inward, creating just enough of a barrier. I didn't slow. I didn't stop. A crew member in a navy blazer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. She glanced once at me, then smiled with practiced ease. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Ward," she said, voice clear and precise. "The owner is now aboard." No one clapped, but no one spoke either. I gave a small nod and stepped onto the yacht, the manila folder firm under my arm. The teak deck beneath my shoes felt solid, real, like something I built, not borrowed. I didn't look back. I walked past the floral arrangements Portia had chosen to impress, past the curated tables with name cards and eucalyptus runners. No one offered me a drink. No one asked if I needed help with my bag. That was fine. I hadn't come to be hosted. I passed through the main salon down the portside hall and out to the aft deck. There, finally alone, I let my shoulders drop not in exhaustion but in return. The sea stretched quiet around us, and inside that quiet I heard the voice again, this time from above, steady and respectful. "We're ready to depart once we receive your clearance, Ms. Ward." I turned, met her eyes, and said, "Proceed." I was seated in the lounge, legs crossed, lemon tea in hand, when I heard Portia's voice take on that performance pitch she always used when a camera was rolling. "Hi, everyone," she said brightly, holding her phone just above eye level to catch the best light. "We're so thrilled to continue the Ward family tradition out on the water again. There's nothing like the open sea to remind you of where you come from and what legacy really means." The words were smooth, sugar-coated, each one designed to sound casual but carry weight. I didn't move. I didn't look up. I just sipped. She kept going. "Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who shows up. Loyalty, love, shared history. That's what matters." Then, like punctuation from the universe, a voice rang out behind her, loud enough to land inside the stream. "We're honored to have you aboard again, Ms. Ward, the owner." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Portia's arm dropped just an inch. Her face didn't falter, but the edges stiffened. Her smile stuck too wide, too fixed. She paused mid-sentence. And then the comments started. "Wait, she's the owner." "That shift that tell us more about Ms. Ward," Portia explained. The hearts and likes were replaced with question marks and side eyes. She tapped the screen rapidly, fumbling to end the feed or mute it or maybe reverse time. But the moment had already landed. I didn't flinch, didn't gloat. I let the silence do the explaining. Callista, Jonas's cousin, slipped into the seat beside me, casually flipping through her phone. "I give it 5 minutes before she tries to spin," that she whispered. I didn't answer. I just set my tea down gently, the cup resting on its saucer like punctuation. Above deck, I could still hear the hum of the boat and the low, fractured voices of people adjusting their narrative. I already knew whose voice would carry next. The dining salon glowed in soft candlelight, every detail manicured from the folded napkins to the sprigs of rosemary at each place setting. Portia stood near the head of the table, her glass raised just high enough to command the room. She smiled, like nothing had cracked, like the earlier live stream hadn't shifted the air. "I just want to thank everyone for being here." She began, her voice polished, her eyes sweeping the room without ever landing on me. "It's not just the setting or the tradition, it's the people, the ones who protect our legacy, who understand what it takes to uphold it." The room nodded, a few murmured approvals drifting between wine glasses. "We only bring those who add to our story," she continued, "not subtract from it." That was the line, the coded message that wasn't even subtle anymore. I stood slowly. No clink of glass, no apology. "I'd like to contribute something," I said. Portia's smile twitched just a flicker. I set the folder on the table, flipped it open with care, and slid out a printed transcript on company letterhead. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "This is from a Zoom call with the family's legal consultant," I said evenly. "Here's the quote. She's not blood. She shouldn't own a family asset." Silence. Even the clinking stopped. Jonas stared at the document like it might combust. "Portia, you said that he asked too quiet." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I laid down a second page. "This is the original purchase agreement. The down payment came from my account." The legal owner listed first me. Aunt Evelyn shifted in her chair. A cousin cleared their throat. No one reached for their wine. "I'm not sharing this for drama," I said. "I'm sharing it because I've listened to stories get rewritten at this table for years without correction." Someone at the far end, Mr. Hannity, one of Jonas's family's oldest friends, spoke gently. "I think we've all been told the wrong story." Heads began to turn. Eyes that had glanced past me now landed fully. I didn't push further. I just gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and took my seat again without ceremony. Jonas didn't say a word, but his silence was no longer safe. Portia didn't come down for breakfast. Her chair sat empty, napkin untouched, the place card still angled just so beside the floral centerpiece. No one mentioned her absence but the space where she should have been said enough. The others were quieter that morning. No scripted laughter, no overperformed toasts, just the sounds of cutlery and cautious glances. Aunt Evelyn poured me coffee without speaking, her hand steadier than usual. Across the table, Jonas's cousin Maddie offered a half smile, the kind that carried something heavier than apology. No one said they were sorry. But no one acted like I didn't exist either. Later, Jonas found me near the stern leaning against the rail. He stepped beside me, not too close, but near enough to be heard over the wind. "I should have said something," he said after a long pause. "Every time she cut you out. Every time you came to me with a look and I said, just let it go." I kept my eyes on the water. "You didn't erase me," I said, calm and measured, "but you didn't stop them either." He nodded once. I thought I was keeping the peace, he added more to himself. I turned toward him, not angry, just done. "You kept her peace, not mine." He didn't defend it. He just stood there, letting the truth settle between us like mist. The rest of the day moved slowly, but with weight. People didn't avoid me. They didn't fawn either. They simply acknowledged with a touch to the shoulder, a second longer eye contact, a question asked directly instead of around me. Presence didn't need an invitation anymore. That night, as the sun dipped behind the marina and the last of the table was cleared, I returned to my cabin and placed the folder on the desk. Not to reread it, just to know it was still there. And then I opened my inbox to find one message waiting sent from an old address I hadn't seen in months. The house felt different when I stepped inside. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. Same stack of unread magazines by the console table. Same scuff on the doorframe. But there was space in the silence now room that hadn't been there before. I placed the manila folder in the drawer beneath the credenza. Not hidden, not displayed. Just stored like a finished chapter. Later that evening, while sorting old mail, I found it wedged between a grocery list and a torn envelope, a note in my father's handwriting, blocky, neat, intentional. "Don't wait for a chair. Build the table." I sat with it for a long time, thumb grazing the edge. I didn't remember when he gave it to me, maybe after some quiet dinner where I'd nodded too much and spoken too little. But he must have noticed. He always did. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Mira, Portia's youngest niece. 23. Always watching, never speaking. "I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out," she wrote. "I've been thinking about everything on that trip. You're the only one in the family who built something herself. Not inherited, not married into. You made it. I'm applying to this business mentorship program and I was wondering if you'd look over my application." I typed back one word, yes. No hesitation, no expectations. Just yes. By Thursday, I had a guest list not for another formal dinner, but for brunch. Simple, light, real. I didn't invite everyone. Not out of spite, just clarity. Only those who saw me, who stayed after the silence. Jonas offered to cook the eggs. Callista brought lemon bars. Ronald came with his wife and a bottle of sparkling cider. Mira showed up early, notebook in hand. We sat around my dining table secondhand and refinished with mismatched chairs and real conversation. No one recorded it. No one performed. It wasn't the table they tried to keep me from. It was the one I had built. And as the laughter drifted through the open window, I heard a soft knock at the front door. The brunch didn't start with a toast. It started with someone laughing mid-sentence while peeling strawberries. Callista had brought too much lemon zest for the tarts, and Ronald couldn't stop sneaking extra spoonfuls of whipped cream onto his plate. Mira sat beside me asking questions with the kind of hunger I recognized not for food, but for direction. There were no cameras, no centerpieces curated for Instagram. Just chipped mugs, second helpings, and voices overlapping in a way that didn't compete, just belonged. Jonas cleared the plates without being asked. He didn't announce it. He just stood, gathered the stack, and headed for the sink. I watched him from the doorway as he rinsed each one, slow and steady, sleeves rolled up like he remembered how to be in a room without performance. He caught my eye once, didn't say anything, didn't need to. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was presence, and that mattered more than any speech he could have rehearsed. I sat back down at the table and looked around, not as a guest, not as someone who was finally allowed in, but as someone who had built the space she was standing in. Not borrowed it, not begged for it, built it. Every story shared that morning came with pauses, laughter, interruptions, detours. Nothing was polished. Everything was honest. I didn't need a spotlight to feel seen. I didn't need their permission to feel rooted. Later, after the last glass was washed and the leftovers packed into mismatched containers, Jonas handed me a towel to dry. His hand brushed mine, no plea, no performance. just there. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something settle. Not victory, but authorship. And as the front door clicked shut behind the last guest, I turned to face the hallway and the unopened envelope waiting near the credenza. I slid the manila folder into the bottom drawer of the hallway credenza, not to reopen, not to rehash, just to know it was there, filed not under conflict but memory. Once a month now, I host a small circle in the sunroom. Women come with notebooks, resumes, rough drafts of ideas no one else ever took seriously. We drink coffee from mismatched mugs, talk about money without apology, and write goals in pen not pencil. Mira always brings a new question. Callista helps facilitate. Sometimes Jonas sits quietly at the edge of the room, not to take up space, but to hold it steady. No one at that table asks for proof I belong there. They know. And I've stopped trying to shrink myself to fit chairs never meant for me. This table, the literal one, sanded and stained with my own hands, holds more than plates and papers. It holds legacy I authored, not inherited, not granted, built. They tried to erase me, but they forgot who designed the page, and now the ink is permanent. The driveway was freshly power washed. I noticed it before I even stepped out of the car because that's the kind of thing my mother does when Jared comes home. I parked behind a luxury SUV that had to be Talia's and sat still for a moment watching the porch light flicker. The house hadn't changed. Same shutters, same wreath on the door, same sinking feeling in my gut. When the door opened, my father Raymond stood in his company's coming sweater. He gave me a brief one-armed hug and said, "Everyone's in the dining room." We waited as long as we could. Inside, the air smelled like roast beef and old expectations. My heels clicked across hardwood as I followed him past the framed photos lining the hallway. Jared's college graduation, Jared in Tuscany, Jared shaking hands with someone important. There was one of me too, third grade, missing a front tooth tucked behind a plant. Elaine looked up as I walked in, smile-poised eyes calculating. "Lena." "Finally," she said, as if I'd held up a Broadway production. "Everyone, this is my daughter. She lives in New York and works with books or something like that." She waved a hand toward me like I was an accessory that didn't match the decor. "Hi," I offered, stepping forward with a tight smile. Talia stood gracious and glowing in soft blue silk. "I've heard so much about you. You're in publishing, right? That sounds fascinating. What do you do exactly?" Before I could answer, my mother laughed. "Oh, she's always been the artsy one. Something literary. It's not like Jared's work, of course." She raised her wine glass with a smirk. "She's just creative." I bit the inside of my cheek. Across the table, Talia tilted her head slightly, then glanced down into her lap. I caught the subtle movement, the unmistakable glow of a phone screen beneath the tablecloth. She tapped scrolled and paused. Her expression didn't change much, but I saw it. Her eyebrows lifted, just a hair, her fingers stilling. Then quietly, she looked back up at me with a kind of curious respect I hadn't seen in a long time. I adjusted my napkin, heart pounding. I didn't know what she'd read yet, but I had a feeling everything was about to shift. I used to think there was something noble about being unnoticed, that if I kept my head down and did everything right, someone would eventually see me. But in the Whitmore household, visibility had a very specific currency: grades, trophies, college banners. And that currency belonged to Jared. From the moment he hit his first home run in Little League, it was clear where the family's attention would go. My parents beamed at every game, screamed from the sidelines, printed his stats in Christmas cards. At 9, he got a room remodel with a sports mural. At 10, a framed poster that read, "Greatness is earned." I was 8 when I wrote my first story about a girl who could speak to birds. My teacher gave it an A+ and a gold star with the words "Brilliant Imagination" scrawled across the top. I ran home with it folded neatly in my backpack, heart beating fast. "Mom, look what I wrote," I said, holding the pages out like treasure. She glanced at it, one hand stirring spaghetti sauce. "That's nice, honey. Put it on the counter, okay? We need to leave soon." Jared's playoff game starts at 6. I placed it gently by the sink, expecting she'd read it later. She never did. Days later, I found it still there, stained with a coffee ring and crusted sauce on the corner. No one had turned the page. That moment settled in me like wet cement. When I won a poetry contest in 6th grade, I didn't even bother mentioning it until the ribbon fell out of my backpack at dinner. You should have told us, Dad said kindly, but he was already turning to ask Jared how tryouts went. I learned not to interrupt momentum. By high school, Jared was the golden boy, varsity quarterback, debate captain, national merit scholar. My parents came to every event of his with bells on. When I got published in a regional teen magazine, my mother said, "That's sweet, but have you thought about a real career?" I stopped showing them things. I kept my poems in folders under my bed. I clapped at Jared's scholarship ceremony, smiling for the camera, even though I knew my name would never be printed on the program. By the time I graduated, I had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight, and I carried that skill like armor when I boarded a one-way flight to New York. New York didn't greet me with open arms. It met me with subway delays, overpriced groceries, and a shoebox apartment with paper-thin walls. But even when the noise rattled my sleep and my paycheck barely stretched past Thursday, I felt more visible there than I ever had at home. I enrolled at a small liberal arts college in the Bronx, working shifts at a bookstore and tutoring freshman essays to keep the lights on. On weekends, I handed out flyers for a performance art group in Union Square just to afford Metro cards. I lived on peanut butter borrowed Wi-Fi in the wild hope that maybe, just maybe, my voice could matter. The writing program was rigorous, but I soaked up every critique. I learned how to cut the fat from my sentences, how to find the blood beneath a pretty metaphor. A professor pulled me aside after workshop once and said, "You don't write to be seen, you write because it's how you breathe. Don't stop." I didn't. After graduation, I was accepted into an MFA program in Brooklyn. I got a partial fellowship and picked up night shifts at a diner to cover the rest. It was exhausting and glorious. I wrote on receipt paper between orders. I wrote in laundry rooms and under library lamps and on the fire escape at 3 a.m. My work started appearing in places I'd once only read small literary journals, then bigger ones. A poem got picked up by Plowshares. An essay landed in the Atlantic. A short story about a girl whose family only remembered her birthday when she won an award made its way into a national anthology. I didn't call home. When my parents did call, the conversations stayed shallow. "How's New York treating you?" meant, "When are you giving up and coming back?" I gave vague answers, asked about Jared, and never mentioned deadlines, grants, or readings. It wasn't that I didn't want to share, it was that I knew what the silence would feel like if I did. 3 years after my MFA, my debut short story collection was picked up by an independent press. Thin Spaces received glowing reviews and a nomination for the American Fiction Prize. When I got the call, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by takeout containers and unpaid bills, and wept. Then I opened my laptop and started writing the next thing. The table was dressed in crystal and china, all gleaming under the chandelier my mother insisted on polishing herself. The kind of presentation reserved for her book club luncheons and Jared's homecomings. I'd forgotten how stiff everything felt in this house, like the silverware might judge you if you used the wrong fork. Talia sat beside Jared, warm and gracious, filling the space with a kind of quiet charm. She asked me thoughtful questions: where I lived, if I liked New York, what kind of books I worked on. I tried to answer, but Elaine always found a way to steer the conversation back to Jared. "Oh, did you tell them about the new office sweetheart?" she said, reaching across him to refill his wine glass. "Corner view of the city. Very impressive. They're even flying him out to consult on that merger in D.C.? That's amazing," Talia said, genuinely beaming at him. "I'm so proud of you." I smiled politely, sipping from my glass, letting the stem cool my fingertips. So, Lena Talia turned back to me. "Are you working on any new books right now?" I opened my mouth, hopeful. "Actually, she's always had her head in the clouds," Elaine interjected with a light laugh. "One time, we practically had to pry her off the couch because she was glued to a book all summer. But that's Lena. Very creative." She said the word like it was a flaw. Jared shifted in his seat. My father cleared his throat but didn't speak. I set my fork down slowly. "I've actually been working on." Elaine waved her hand. "Not everyone needs to be important, dear. Some people just enjoy their little hobbies." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We can't all be making partner at 33. The words landed like glass, cracking beneath the weight of something unspoken. Talia glanced at me, then down at her lap again. I saw the glow of her phone, her fingers moving quietly. A pause. A flick of her thumb. then stillness. I caught the moment her eyes widened just a flicker and then settled into something sharper. Recognition. She looked up slowly, studying me like I was someone new. "Wait," she said, cutting through the hum of conversation. "Sorry to interrupt, but are you that Lena Whitmore?" The table fell silent. Elaine blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Talia turned her phone so everyone could see the screen. "My photo. My name. A review quote. The author of Thin Spaces," she said, almost breathless. "This is you, isn't it?" Jared leaned over to look. My father set down his knife. I felt my breath catch like the room had tilted and everyone was just beginning to notice. I met Talia's eyes and nodded once, quietly, carefully. Jared let out a stunned laugh and said, "Holy shit." Talia's voice was steady, but her eyes gleamed with disbelief as she scrolled. Lena Whitmore, author of Thin Spaces. Winner of the Penn Bingham Prize. Finalist for the National Book Award. Guest lecturer at NYU Columbia, and she glanced up at me, Stanford. The clink of cutlery stopped. Even the flicker of candlelight seemed to hesitate. My mother's laugh came half a beat too late. "Oh, well, there are a lot of Lena Whitmores in the world. Probably just someone with the same name." Talia turned the phone toward her again. "No, this is her. Photo bio interviews. There's even a video of her reading at the 92nd Street Y." Jared leaned over to see. "Jesus," he muttered, his face shifting from confusion to something like awe. "Why didn't you ever say anything I did?" I said quietly, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "More than once." My mother scoffed, folding her napkin. "That's ridiculous. We would have remembered something like that." I took a breath, not to calm down, but to stay upright. When I got my first story published in The Atlantic, I called. Dad answered. "You said Mom was busy getting ready for Jared's tournament. You told me to send it in the mail." Raymond blinked, face unreadable. "I did. You never mentioned it." A year later, when Thin Spaces came out, I sent signed copies. With a note. Elaine looked at me like I'd said something vulgar. "That's absurd. We never received." They were still in the guest room. Unopened. I saw them at Christmas. Jared's brow furrowed. "Wait, you really sent the book?" I thought. "I don't know what I thought." "You thought I was still the girl with her nose in a notebook," I said. "And maybe I still am." But now people read what's in it. There was murmuring from the other end of the table. Jared's fiancé's parents were whispering to each other, one of them clearly Googling on their phone. A distant aunt leaned toward her husband, squinting at the screen. Elaine's smile was frozen now, too taut to hold. "You could have been clearer about it, if it mattered that much to you." I looked at her, not angry anymore, just tired. I stopped expecting it to matter. That's the only way I could keep writing. Raymond lowered his head, eyes fixed on his plate. Jared sat back in his chair, arms crossed, studying me like he'd never seen me before. Talia reached across the table, her voice soft. "Your book changed the way I think about sisters. I had no idea it was personal. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because for the first time I wasn't the one defending the truth. I was simply standing in it, and the silence around me was starting to sound like reckoning." Elaine's jaw was tight, her wine glass untouched now. She looked between me and Talia as if we'd conspired to humiliate her. "So you wrote about us," she said sharply. "All those stories, those damaged mothers, distant fathers. That's what you've been doing all these years, turning your family into fiction." I held her gaze steady. "I wrote about what it feels like to be invisible in the place that was supposed to see me first. If that sounds familiar, maybe you're recognizing yourselves." Across the table, Jared sat straighter. "Come on, Mom. That's not fair. Lena's not trying to attack anyone. She's just telling the truth." Elaine's eyes flashed. "Don't patronize me, Jared. You don't know what it's like to have your own daughter twist you into some character in a book." "I never named you," I said calmly. "I didn't have to. The feeling was the story." Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked older than he had an hour ago. Jared turned to me. "I honestly thought you had it easier," he said, his voice low. "No expectations, no pressure. I used to envy that." I blinked, stunned. "You envied not being seen." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It felt like you had space. I didn't realize that space came with silence. It did, I said. Years of it. Talia placed her hand over mine. You're writing? It made me cry, Lena. Especially the story about the girl who mails her parents invitations they never open. I've thought about it every day since I read it. I just didn't know it was real. Elaine pushed her chair back abruptly. The scrape of it echoed against the floor. Excuse me, she said, voice brittle. I need to check on dessert. She left the room, her posture stiff, not looking at anyone. The conversation paused, then shifted awkwardly as guests tried to fill the void with small talk, but no one was really listening. Jared glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. She'll come around, he said. Eventually. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't feel the need to follow her or soften the truth. For once, I hadn't bent myself to make others more comfortable. Raymond finally spoke, voice quiet. I didn't know, Lena. I should have asked more, paid more attention. You should have, I said, not cruelly, just plainly. But now you do. He nodded once the lines on his face deepening. In the silence that followed, I realized this was the first time I'd ever seen my father look ashamed. From across the table, Talia leaned in and whispered, You know, I think they're finally hearing you. And for the first time in a long time, I believed someone meant it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside a pale blue envelope with my father's handwriting slanted neat careful. I stared at it for a while before opening it. Inside was a single page. Lena, I finished your book. Twice, actually. Once to follow the story, and again to listen for your voice in it. I'm sorry it took me so long to hear you. Your writing is beautiful. It matters. And so do you. Love, Dad. I sat with it in my hands, stunned by the quietness of it. No grand gestures, just the truth at last. Jared called that weekend like he had every week since the dinner. Our conversations were still finding their rhythm, some awkward silences, some unspoken guilt, but they were real. He asked questions now, about my work, my deadlines, my next book. Actually, he said that Sunday Talia and I were wondering if you'd do a short reading at the engagement party. Something from your book, just a few minutes. I hesitated, caught between the instinct to shrink and the urge to rise. I'd love to, I said. When I arrived at the party, the backyard was strung with lights. The tables were dressed in navy and gold. My name card wasn't at the edge this time. It sat at the center table one beside Jared and Talia and across from my parents. Elaine looked up when I approached. Her smile was brief, brittle, but it held. You look nice, she said, eyes flicking to my dress. Thanks, I replied, not pushing for more. The seat was cushioned, the air warm. Talia handed me a glass. It didn't erase the silence or the years it filled, but maybe quietly it was enough to begin again.